when he wrote his book on the origin of the species by means of natural selection, which is a mouthful. But it's basically research that he did back in the 1800s on the Galapagos Islands, observing the life there, which was unique to the rest of the world, and came up with this idea that things, new species created actually evolved rather than were created. And to kind of make it a little bit more understandable, the natural selection eventually got replaced with a concept we commonly know today as survival of the fittest. And that's basically reactions to changes in the ecosystems. So this was a theory that he produced and in that book. And since then, there's been additional research done by a new group in the last 40 or so years. If you did get a chance to see the video, there's a nice 15-minute documentary that kind of sums up what that book was about and what they found. But if you didn't, you can watch it later. It essentially is newer research where they went back to the Galapagos Islands and they looked at, they focused on just the bird species, on the finches there. And they realized that as they were tracking this, that evolution happens, but it also happens at a much faster rate. So it didn't take generations or years to happen. It actually happened in months or even weeks based on changes that happen in the ecosystem. So if you get a chance, you can watch it if you're interested, or you can read the book. But the key thing is that while Darwin realized that evolution was a concept that he introduced, he didn't get the opportunity to realize how fast these changes could occur. So that's kind of the kickoff point here. It also kind of led me to the thought, does agile coaching also evolve too? Maybe there's a natural progression on that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a journey that one company went through their agile coaching and how it changed over time as different ecosystems or different eras took place. So the way I've set this up is as we go through each one of those ecosystems, I want to talk about what are the preconditions for that era or that ecosystem. And it also might include post conditions as we were coming out of the previous one. And then I'll talk about what is it that we did in that particular era, what approaches were used, and how that was different or why it was different than what was done in the previous one. And then we'll touch on what were the positive things and the negative things that happened within that particular time. And then looking back kind of with, since it's the year 2020, looking back with 2020 hindsight, what did we learn from that particular era? And as we look at it in hindsight from today. So that's kind of the structure for it. And then also I'll show you the timeline of each of those eras and when those took place. So the very first one here we refer to as the Pathfinder era. This is our first start at this company. The timeline for that was 2016. It's not playing. There we go. And what was happening at the company prior to this was they were basically doing your classic waterfall projects. The people that worked on these projects were temporary or borrowed resources, which I hate the term resources. That's a whole nother thing I could go off on. But that was the environment there. You had a lot of siloed teams that were basically organizationally set up based on what system or what functions they supported. So you had a lot of dependencies between teams. You had a lot of queues as work was passed back and forth. That led to long lead times on the delivery of what the projects were supposed to bring. And the involvement with business was very minimal. Basically, it was just at the start where the business would hand off their requirements to technology. The technology teams would develop that solution, bring it back and hand it back to the business. And hopefully it was what they asked for, or even somewhere remotely close. This is where we were, and we were going into 2016 for this era. So what did we do? We did something new. We, the IT leadership decided to leverage, after a little coaxing, to leverage some on-site developers and consultants that we had there that was doing some work for us using Agile. So we decided we wanted to experiment and start some new teams on our own. So we created a new cross-functional team for developing ways to get environments stood up quickly for development teams. So instead of months or weeks, we're talking about trying to do this within days or less. So we created that team, and we also created a similar one for e-commerce to try to improve our customer experience. So these were brand new teams that didn't exist before. We were given very few guardrails, so it kind of was an implicit permission to be able to bend rules as we needed to get things done. So we did. We also introduced new roles: product owner, scrum master. These were something that were brand new to the company. They had not had experience with these before. And then what we did was we paired these teams. These new roles were paired with external coaches, and that's to help guide the newly minted POs, scrum masters, and team members. And it was set up so that there was one coach per each role on the team. So minimum, you had 3 external coaches on these teams: one for the PO, one for the scrum master, at least one for developers. If you had UI, or if you had an analysis role, then there was coaches for each one of those. And then we actually extended that beyond those 2 new teams to 4 existing teams. So teams that were working in logistics and also in business intelligence. So we try to apply that same model to those other teams and let them benefit from the new Agile approach. And one of the benefits that we were able to get was that we were able to, the organization allowed, at least for the new teams, allowed them to free up time to learn and really understand and build things like team working agreements. And we were given several weeks to do this. So we had lots of time to really get this thing kicked off. And then as part of that inception phase, we created a sprint 0 so we could start building that initial backlog to start working. And then this experimentation and learning was encouraged for the new teams, and to some extent also with the existing teams, although they were kind of already under the pressure to continue supporting what they were doing previously. So this particular ecosystem or era lasted just over 1 year. So on the plus side, pros for this: we now had dedicated teams focusing on prioritized value delivery. People were allocated freed up capacity so that they could learn and get better at Agile. Team members were experimenting with new tools. So for the first time, we were using Docker and GitHub and AWS, instead of just using the prescribed technology that was typically selected by management or somebody outside of the team that was actually using it. And then this also helped us identify bottlenecks in business processes, organizational processes, which again contributed to the long lead times. On the con side, the external coaching model was too expensive to be able to scale it across a large number of teams. And then we also had to create workarounds around these business process bottlenecks because the process owner, either their mindset or because they were not part of the initial PATHFINDER team. So this is something they were even unaware of, perhaps. And then the time required by a team that was new to Agile It took time and for them to learn and become effective, and it was longer and more expensive than they originally expected it would be, because more time was needed for them to become familiar with Agile, for them to really be able to be consistent in delivery. That then takes us to our 2020 hindsight here. So what we learned was relying on external coaches, it can't be effective for a large organization unless you're also building an internal coaching capability. Also, we needed a clearer definition of done in terms of when coaching a team gets to the point where that team can become self-sustaining in their Agile journey. They don't have to rely on those external coaches. And as an experiment, we learned we can do Agile, but we can't scale it across many teams using this particular model. So that's the first era that we encountered. And then we moved on into what we call the transformation era. And the precondition for the postcondition coming out of it was, number one, pilot success. We found out that cross-functional teams can deliver more easily. And we also achieved buy-in from the executives to move forward with Agile. So definitely success there. The approach that we were going to take now going into this new era is we were going to develop an internal training and coaching team, starting with 5, and then eventually it grew to 10 internal coaches, most of them drawn from either Pathfinder teams or other people in IT roles. There was also a business case built for rolling Agile out across all of the IT teams and functions as an 18-month project with cost savings projected at the end as an outcome. And there was about a dozen external coaches and consultants involved in prepping and building this business case, and then also the execution and training of the internal coaches. And this era was 2017 and 2018. So what did we do? First off, we created an Agile training program using a new space theme, which was something new for us. Rather than picking an industry theme that we usually follow, we chose a space theme, and we created instructional material, and we also set up a boot camp training space, which we called Space Camp. And then our first batch of 16 teams were launched, spending 3 months with 5 newly trained internal coaches, and the external coaches were shadowing and supporting them along the way. And then a rolling wave was set up. Rolling wave launches were set up, or missions as we referred to them. And we brought in 5 new coaches, and we would alternate them on each wave as the next one was rolling out, or the next mission. Each mission had about 10 to 15 teams, and originally they were using 3 months in the space camp, but then that got shrunk down to just a couple weeks. And that was because there was a push to hurry up and deliver on the number of Agile teams. And that was fed through a couple mechanisms here. Number one, they set up internal organizational incentives to hit the number of teams by the end of the year. That'll definitely get people moving. And we also, instead of building new teams, in order to identify new teams faster, they took kind of a lift and shift approach. So they basically were taking existing teams and saying, okay, scheduling those into the next mission, and being able to increase the launches sooner by also reducing the amount of time that we were going to be spending in these mission launches and in these space camps. So in effect, we had kind of a waterfall approach to delivering Agile teams, but we were using Agile labels, so that was okay. To make the training more effective with this reduced touch time now, we introduced some new role-based training. So instead of using general training for everybody, we found out the POs and Scrum Masters were not really prepared for these roles. So we came up with some role-based training for them to specifically address components of that role. And then as we learned certain service teams were struggling with Scrum, we needed to bring Kanban in. We introduced the Kanban framework for those to help them be more successful for handling the way their workflow comes in, or their work intake, I should say. And then with a little bit of a late start, we also tried to inject DevOps into this here too. And we tried to do it in a similar fashion and in parallel, but with separate coaches for the DevOps side of it. So we had kind of several things going on at the same time here. So on the upside, we introduced Agile to all of IT, and we also developed an internal competency for Agile training. We exceeded the number of targets rolled out to hit our incentive bonuses. Yay. We developed an inventory of reusable training material and kept refining it as we learned more and had more experience. Using the space theme instead of the industry theme that we usually used kind of generated some excitement and maybe some hope that this was actually going to be something different. And it definitely was something, Agile was something that the company, it was different than what the company had always done before. On the downside, the focus was on IT only. We really did not involve business by direction or by direction. So we required proxies from IT to represent the business as product owners. So kind of pseudo product owners. And our need for speed drove to this lift and shift model, which in some cases resulted in no real changes for those teams. We were trying to fit every team and department into Agile, and that kind of alienated some of them because we were trying to force them into a model that wasn't going to work for them very well. And then also the internal training and coaching team was driven by numbers as opposed, that ended up that was driven by numbers as opposed to focusing on quality. The internal coaching team no longer had time to really learn or to connect with each other or with the other teams as a result of this speeded up process. And then after the rollout, our focus then pivoted to assessing those teams in terms of what's their maturity with Scrum. And so teams then became wary of the Agile police or the Scrum police coming around checking them out. And then and part of it, the reason the focus shift was because the external coaching group really wasn't experienced in the coach model. They were more coach the team. So they didn't really come in with a ready-made approach on how to do this here. They were kind of figuring it out as we were going. And then introducing DevOps at the very end there wasn't very successful, even when we tried to merge them with our coaching team to try to make it more of a coordinated effort rather than standalone efforts. So that, oh yeah, and so looking back on that, we wondered, do we really need to make all service teams Agile? Did it really make sense to do that? And then supporting Agile teams, it requires a lot of training and engaged coaching support, but training itself will not last. So we needed to have more focus on the coaching than we previously did. And we also learned that credibility comes from experience. So we realized that experience on an Agile team should be a minimum requirement in order for internal people to become an Agile coach or trainer. It's very hard to build that credibility if you didn't have the hands-on experience before that, which we learned in some cases. So thus ended the transformation era. And then we came into the third era here, which we refer to as the enablement era or ecosystem. And post-condition coming out of the transformation era is we manage the death by PowerPoint method, #sarcasm. We also cranked out a lot of agile teams, 93 of them to be exact. And the stated business case objectives were not realized, at least not the savings. We did hit the number of teams though. So now going into this new era, preconditions for that. Oh, I know why I'm not seeing it. I gotta move this. There we go. I'm not seeing part of my screen. Now I see it. Yeah, so first off, we had a change in leadership at the highest level in IT, which kind of changed our direction a little bit and our flexibility. The external coaching or consulting engagement was terminated. And the remaining budget that we had left, the engagement budget, we repurposed and we brought in some experienced the coach group instead. So now we had somebody who had actually had experience in setting up and training coaches rather than just teams. So here's what we did. We pivoted from a push model of mission launches to become a customer pull model of servicing teams and business needs. We also reorganized and rebranded the internal coaching team as the Agility Enablement Partners. We removed or discontinued the DevOps portion of that and brought in the Jira support team. So we represented learning, coaching, and technology all as one brand now. And the internal coaching team now is learning to engage both individuals and team coaching. So that's something that was, they did not have much experience with prior to this. And the training approach also changed in terms of involving learner preferences. So using like training from the back of the room techniques, not using PowerPoint, but doing drawing and visual and interactive type of training. We also had coaches start pairing on team engagements. So instead of one person going to a team, we had two sets of eyes or ears to understand what the ask was from those teams and how we could help them address those concerns. And then the coaches learned also not to offer solutions, but actually to help the coachees learn by to solve their own problems using a coaching canvas as a tool to kind of lay out what the problem is and in a way that they could understand what was happening and how they might come up with some ideas on how they could address it and then track that progress. We also began to improve our relationship between business and IT through engaged trainings that we started doing, facilitating retrospectives for both IT and business. And also coaching approach changed, so we're meeting people where they are at instead of trying to push them into something. We also hosted in-house Scrum Master, Advanced Scrum Master, CSPO training, certification training, also Kanban KMP training, so that we had quality and consistency in terms of the teaching. And then we also supported those that went on to get their advanced CSPO or less practitioner training as well. So trying to get a higher level of consistent training that wasn't homespun like we had done in the past. We were also encouraged to take thought leadership outside of the company. So what we had learned, what we had experienced, we were encouraged to take that out, to present at conferences or at meetups and things like that, and share our learnings and our experiences, like I'm doing right now. We also brought sexy back too, the spirit of experimentation by coaches, coaches and teams. Communities of practices started organically by Scrum Masters and POs taking ownership. It wasn't owned by the coaching team, but we supported it as best we could. We also started engagements, coaching engagements with the director level, which had kind of been ignored in the previous eras, so that we can help facilitate adoption of Agile practices from that level. And then we also set up an immersion program so that we could cycle Scrum Masters from teams into the coaching team so they could learn new coaching techniques that they could take back to their team. And the reverse of that is we also lent out coaches to fill in as Scrum Masters to help those teams and also give them some hands-on experience that maybe they hadn't had previously and understand the environment better. And then we launched a regular schedule of focused training workshops. And those workshops addressed specific challenges that we knew that teams were facing. So some of it was related to technical practices like TDD or roadmap to delivery, soft skills like are you listening, and even an Agile fundamentals workshop that was open to anybody that outside of IT. Hey, that's the business. They were wanting these Agile fundamentals training, so we were doing them for them as well. And as we were doing more of these, we also realized we were going to have to do some for the people that worked remotely as well. So we had to kind of modify it to start handling remote participants as well. So wins. We got greater recognition and appreciation by the teams on how the coaching team can help them. We also started rebuilding bridges that were burned in the previous era because of the need for speed. And the business is now showing signs of agility awareness and asking for our engagement, which was something very new. Our coaching and training effectiveness improved significantly, and our coaching team's confidence improved through this pairing by working on a variety of challenges and situations, as opposed to individuals going out and offering canned solutions or suggestions to help them work through problems or challenges they were facing. And then every Monday we set aside as Collaboration Monday. So the team sat and worked together to work on internal alignment and learning each week. Defeats, if you would call it that, was we realized there was no way to rapidly scale or apply Agile in this manner across everything at the same time. And we no longer had access to the external coaches of this new engagement partner as our budget depleted. So we lost that. This approach that we were using might have frustrated solution seekers who just wanted answers to their problems, because we were trying to replace that with personal accountability and commitment to solving these problems themselves, but helping them along the way. Also, if you're using a pull model, it requires a lot of marketing and outreach at a personal level, although we did have some showcases to kind of promote the team and what we could offer, but without trying to sell Agile itself. So looking back now on that era, we really, what you truly know and what you think know, there's a gap. There's a learning curve on that. So you think you know what you need to know, and then you quickly find out, oh, we don't know as much as we do. So we have to dig in and we have to work on that to become better at it. Really, the path that we took is the only way we could have arrived at where we're now. If you think of the open space concept, what happens is the only thing that could have happened. That's kind of where we were at that point. But probably the biggest takeaway is that coaching is much more powerful than than training. So there needs to be more focus on the coaching side of it here than we had done previously, even though we were called coaches. So at this point here.
And Ron, just real quick, we're coming very close to time. So
yes, I was just going to say, I was going to pause right here and see if there were any questions. I do have a couple slides at the end here that kind of takes it from where this was expected and to what's happened since then, because I think that's important as well.
Great. What questions do we have from the audience? There's one in the chat. Any specific reason for not introducing communities of practice?
I'm sorry?
There was a question in the chat. Any specific reason for not introducing communities of practice?
I think it was something that we thought if we tried to force it on them, it would not be well received, especially since at least in that middle era, there was kind of some challenges that the team had in terms of our reputation or our kind of their experiences, especially like when they were looking at us as being the Scrum police. I think that wouldn't have helped if we'd have tried to also force them into the community of practice. So it had to kind of happen organically. And there were a couple leaders in the Scrum Master and in the PO world that were interested in doing this. So we supported them and helped them build that without looking like we forced it on the teams.
Great, thank you for that. And then I have one quick question. You know, so of all of these things and all the things that you went through, there's going to be other people on the call who are going to be, you know, kind of trying to do similar things and to maybe do rolling wave training or coaching or whatever. If you had kind of now looking back, if you had one piece of advice to give to the folks on the call, given your experiments here and the outcomes from them, you know, what would you say, or what would you tell yourself now? You know, what would you tell your 2018 self, knowing what you know now?
I would say probably is that there is no silver bullet. There is no quick fix way to do this. It takes patience, it takes time, because people have to learn, they have to practice. I would compare it to like if you wanted to be a concert pianist. You're not going to learn it in a couple months. You're not going to learn it in a couple weeks. You need to learn it, and then you need to practice and keep refining it in order for you to be successful at it. And it's going to take some failures and some learning along the way until you get good enough to move to the next level and to the next level. So you have to realize it's going to take time, which probably means money as well, to be able to become proficient at this and get the benefits that you expected you were going to get by moving in this direction.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ron. Appreciate it. Appreciate your slides. Some good stuff there. And we are about 5 minutes to the hour, so I'm going to turn it over to Audrey. Audrey Sherry, are you around?
I'm here, and I was going to say, I know we booked an hour of time. We can probably do some closing announcements if people have to run, and then Ron, you could take a few minutes to take us home, and we'll stick around about 10 minutes extra for some questions, I think would be
Absolutely.
great. Perfect. So if you do have to run at an hour time right now, I'm going to stick some links in the chat because we have tons more upcoming events. And the first one is we're going to learn about mapping organizational roles to safe roles coming up. We have another meetup, Agile Toolkit at lunch, where we're going to reflect on everything Agile that happened in 2020. And then our coaching circles are free events where everybody can come get any advice they need, share tips, and hear from other organizations about what's going on. And then, of course, any Agile and Scrum training you need, Lightspeed has it for you, and there's the link. So any questions, send them over to us at info@lightspeed.com, and hopefully we'll see you on the next event. So have a great night if you have to go. And if not, Ron, back to you, and we'll hear your wrap up.
All right. So this presentation was one that I actually started putting together early this year for plans to deliver it later in the year. So that would have been the normal ending point here. But then something happened this year that I think surprised everybody. we had a new ecosystem that popped up that nobody anticipated would coming with the coronavirus showing up. So suddenly it's a matter of not business as usual anymore. It's like, how do we react? How do we respond, and fast? So responding to the pandemic, we had to do a lot of things quickly. And how did we do this? So what we had to do is we had to pivot from using long range roadmaps or business as usual approach as we were doing it, to making changes and making them now. So what's happening is now we're suddenly seeing overnight, we're seeing agility being driven by across the entire organization by executive leadership. And it's impacting all areas. It's not just IT, it's supply chain, it's financial, it's legal, it's sales and marketing, and technical. And creating these cross-functional teams to address specific problems, major problems that are happening out there with the market, with our customers. And so with this focus and with a number of changes like a lot of companies had to do in order to keep operating without getting in trouble, they decided that they were going to discontinue the Agility Enablement Partners as a standalone team. And those coaches that remained with the company were actually reassigned directly into key teams where there was a lot of work going on. So we've been redeployed into roles within specific teams now as Scrum Masters. Bottom line is really that change and evolution can happen fast when it becomes survival of the fittest. So Darwin didn't realize how fast changes could occur. Neither did we until this happened. So now the question is this going to be the impetus for how we're going to operate going forward every day and not just responding to a crisis? And I think the only way we're going to know is time will tell.